I'd like to return to the topic of terrestrial ecosystems or biomes in the Yellowstone ecosystem. I had to go through that pretty quickly in the module, so I want to expand on that topic a little bit now. So the first of these would be deciduous forest. So the deciduous forest then would be kind of a broad term referring to broadleaf trees that drop their leaves in the fall and winter and then regrow those leaves in the spring and summer. And deciduous forests or deciduous trees do best in areas which are relatively wet compared to the rest of the ecosystem and that has a better quality soil than we tend to find in the rest of the ecosystem. And the deciduous trees contribute to the quality of the soil by dropping their leaves, then those decompose in the summer and contribute to the actual soil itself. So this is part of the feedback system where normally we look at climate and geology determining the plants that grow in an area, but the plants themselves can contribute to what plants grow there, in this case through decomposition of leaves. So in the Yellowstone ecosystem, the primary deciduous plants or deciduous forests that we're going to see are aspen forests. And we refer to those as aspen stands or aspen clones is really the term that we now use. So when we use the term stand, it kind of implies that the trees are all developing from different seeds. But what we know about aspens now is that they actually have a very expanded root system, and so the trees will actually share the same root system and are really all part of the same organism, so we refer to it as a clone of aspens now. So the other major type of deciduous trees that we find in the ecosystem would be cottonwoods. There are a few species of cottonwoods, and we tend to find those along waterways, and those are part of riparian ecosystems. Now, the next major class of ecosystem would be coniferous forests. So again, that's a broad term, and coniferous forests are composed of conifers, and these are evergreen trees. They don't drop their leaves in the winter, they hang on to them year-round, and they tend to be needle-like leaves, either set individually or in clusters that we call fascicles. And so within the Yellowstone ecosystem, our major coniferous forests are lodgepole pines. And I would say that this is the dominant tree in the ecosystem. We really find it all the way from the Tetons up into the Yellowstone ecosystem. Lodgepole pines do particularly well in very poor soils, and much of the ecosystem does have poor soils, and so the lodgepole pine will eventually dominate in those ecosystems. And in some areas of the Yellowstone ecosystem, really it's just practically 100% lodgepole pines. Really, really impressive. Another important tree or a couple of species of tree would be the blue spruce and the Engelmann spruce. We tend to find the spruces in areas that are a little bit wetter. So some of the canyons, particularly in the Teton ecosystem and the canyons that go up into the Teton range, we'll find a lot of spruce there. And the blue spruce eventually becomes the tallest tree in the ecosystem, and it will eventually be the dominant tree in a lot of these canyons. And actually, some ecologists feel that the blue spruce is really eventually the dominant tree in the entire ecosystem, but there's some debate about that. Another type of tree that we see in the ecosystem would be the white bark pine. White bark pines do particularly well at high altitudes, and the white bark pine cones are really an important source of food actually for the grizzly bear and a lot of animals in the ecosystem. The limber pine would be another tree that does well at higher altitudes. Also, it does well in wind-blown canyons. So areas that are very windy that some of the other trees might not do well in, limber pine will do well there. Also the white bark pine. They both have very flexible branches, and that's where the term limber pine comes from. And then the Douglas fir, we tend to find in some areas where we have mixed forests. Douglas fir tend to do a little bit better, I think, with slightly better soils and also slightly lower altitudes compared to some of the other trees that we've talked about. So those would be the major stands or forests that we find in the Yellowstone ecosystem that belong to the broad category of coniferous forests. Now, grasslands, in the national parks themselves, we don't really see a lot of classic grassland, but around the periphery of the ecosystem, we do see, true grasslands. And so grasslands historically are where you have the best soils in the world. And so grasses are annuals, sometimes biannuals. They'll grow for a year, die, then decompose, contributing to the composition of the soil, and then grasses grow again. And so soil builds up, over the years, centuries, millennia, and this soil will be the highest quality soil. And in most of the world, we have plowed under our grasslands and turned those into our croplands. So again, within the heart of the ecosystem, we don't see a lot of classic grassland, but as you move out into areas of Montana and Wyoming and so on, you will run into classic temperate grasslands. And of course, ungulates of different types, bison, elk, deer, and so on will do very, very well in grasslands and really benefit from those ecosystems. Now, in the Yellowstone ecosystem, again, we do see grasslands, but they're more typically the offshoot of meadows, sometimes part of wetlands that are seasonal wetlands, but I'll talk more about that in just a second. Another major category of ecosystem would be chaparral ecosystem. Chaparral ecosystems tend to be a little bit drier. They have relatively poor soils, relatively low diversity. And in the Yellowstone ecosystem, as really is true throughout most of the western states, the primary chaparral ecosystem is the big sagebrush ecosystem. And so the sagebrush has a distinctive odor. The big sagebrush in particular tends to store excess nutrients in the leaves in the form of oils. And so as our grasslands, big sagebrush is prone to fires and can burn pretty easily. And this is one of the ways that the older plants are eliminated and newer plants get a chance to grow. So in the Yellowstone ecosystem, again, when you see chaparral, it's big sagebrush ecosystem. And then tundra, classic tundra is what we normally associate with the poles, where there is a continuous permafrost where the soil is frozen year-round. But we do have tundra-like or tundra ecosystems at high altitudes throughout the Yellowstone ecosystem. And what happens at these high altitudes is you have very little soil. What soil you have is very low quality. And typically it's very, very windy also when you get up in altitude at the top of the mountains and so on. And so as a result, because there's not a lot of soil, trees cannot get their roots planted in. They can't really grow very tall because they just get blown over if they do. And so then you'll end up with tundra-like conditions there. So again, at higher altitudes in the Yellowstone ecosystem, we'll see tundra-like ecosystems. And then as it relates to wetlands, there are a variety of wetlands, both seasonal and perennial. Seasonal wetlands would be those that are wet part of the year and then dry out, and typically those become grasslands later in the season. And then perennial ecosystems we'll find around various lakes. This is an area along the Snake River in the Teton Range, and this is an area known as Willow Flats. And so this would be a perennial wetland here. So this is an area that's going to be wet year-round, or at least through the summer when the snow melts, and willows will dominate, particularly in these perennial wetlands. So, like I said, I just wanted to expand a little bit on some of the biomes that we see in this ecosystem, and that will do it for this topic.